So welcome everyone to tonight's AMA Boston Marketing Workshop. Super excited to be here with you all. We have a great event planned tonight. Let me just pull up my screen to share with everyone. All right, awesome. So as all of you know, tonight's event is Leading in a Social World, how to use social media to build social capital. We're joined by our guest speaker tonight, Aaron Templer, the founder of 3 Over 4, a marketing boutique agency based out of Denver. And transparently, Aaron is also a past president of AMA Colorado. So he is very familiar with AMA, and thank you for being here tonight, Aaron. I know we have a great session planned, so super excited to have you joining us tonight. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Goodnow. I'm the VP of Programming for AMA Boston. I'll be your host for tonight's event. So excited to be here with you and looking forward to having a great session tonight. And before we jump into the meat of tonight's event, just wanted to go over a few things with all of you. You'll see the agenda here on the left. We have a brief agenda. The majority of tonight's hour is really going to be spent with Aaron guiding the conversation. We do also have a few breakout sessions scheduled and mixed into the agenda for all of you to kind of network and talk about a few discussion points as well that we'll all be convening on and discussing as a group session after. So, and we are going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of tonight's event for questions, discussion points, anything you might want to chat about, ask Aaron, discuss amongst each other. So we'll build that into the end of the hour tonight. Just a few housekeeping things. Please do keep your mics muted unless we are calling upon you to speak or you're in that breakout room. Most of you already have them muted, I saw, so thank you for that. Just wanted to try to avoid as much disruption with audio as possible. The event's being recorded, so we'll get this distributed to everybody that joined and signed up for tonight's event in the next few days. And feel free to take any photos, videos, any kind of content you wanted to share about the event on your social profiles. And if you do, definitely use the hashtag AMA Boston. We love to see all of your content on social and engage with you all. So feel free to post anything you'd like, use that hashtag, and we'll be sure to be on the lookout for it on social and engage with any of your posts. Just real quick, a little bit about AMA Boston for some of you that, you know, this might be your first call, this might be your 20th call, but if you're looking to get involved with the chapter, either joining as a member or volunteering, we have a lot of great volunteer opportunities. Definitely consider it. For those of you that don't know, AMA Boston is the educational networking hub for all New England marketers. We cover the entire New England region, not just the Boston area as our chapter name suggests. So we have a much larger geographical region that we do cover. If you are interested in getting involved, maybe you're transitioning careers, looking to add a new skill to your resume, or even if you're just looking to build your network a little bit, definitely consider joining or volunteering. Like I said, we have a lot of our board members on the call tonight, so feel free to engage with myself or anybody else that's in the chat to ask any questions or follow up about any of those volunteer opportunities. And if you're looking to consider joining the chapter, we have a lot of really great member benefits, things like discounts on all future AMA Boston events, access to exclusive resources and tools. We also offer a few different member-only networking opportunities. So there's some really great member benefits as well. You can visit amaboston.org to learn more in that link below, or reach out to any of the board members in the call tonight, including myself, if you have any questions. And we do offer different pricing tiers based on who you are and how you're going to be joining. If you have a group, maybe a few colleagues from work, we offer group rates, student rates as well. So definitely consider it. Any questions, feel free to reach out. And without further ado, I wanted to introduce tonight's speaker, Aaron Templer. And rather than have me read from his bio here, I'll give him a chance to introduce himself. So, Aaron, thanks so much for being on the call. I'll hand it over to you.
Right on. Thank you, Chris. And I am super psyched to be with you all this evening. And I'm coming to you from Denver. I went to school in Boston. I've got a soft spot in my heart for Boston. I know a couple of the board members. I know Jamie, and yeah, I'm just really excited to kind of connect in person with everybody. It's a favorite place of mine. It's very sentimental and exciting, and I can't wait to get back. Actually, it's been a while. So thank you for having me. Just really quick, all this, I'll reference a bunch of sources and studies and books and stuff, and they're all referenced at the end of this PowerPoint or keynote, whatever presentation, and I can send it to anyone that wants it. So just send me an email, which is right there on the screen. I've been speaking for, a fair number of years, and I always just kind of have this standing offer that if you want to have a virtual coffee to talk about these concepts and how they relate specifically to your context, anytime, just email me and we'll get that set up, because I think what we're talking about here is sort of zoomed back. It's an approach to social media. It's an approach to leadership. And so it necessarily has to be kind of big picture, strategic, and one of those things that you need to then apply to your specific context. So if you want to have any kind of help or just sort of brainstorming on how to make those connections more direct to your context, thrilled to do that at any time. So please email me and stay connected, because I think what we're going to talk about is a little different. I'm going to ask you to kind of put a different hat on and think about social media differently for sure. And think also kind of elevate the way you think about marketing. It's kind of an urgent issue of mine. I'm on this mission to help marketers think of ourselves more as leaders, and we'll get more into that. But so now you can just kind of imagine you taking off your marketing hat and putting on a leadership one. To the degree that you know leadership or whatever you think about leadership, just put that hat on, set the marketing one aside for a little bit. We'll reference it. We'll kind of look at it every now and then. But I think when you start to look through social connections, look at social connections through a leadership lens, you start to see things quite a bit differently. Put your questions in the chat. We'll have at least one, possibly two breakouts as we go along, and then a time for Q&A at the end. So I was doing marketing for a business school when I heard Clay Shirky say this around 2005 in one of his TED Talks. Clay Shirky is an NYU professor, and at the time was just a seminal thought leader in the area of social groups online. Leadership was at the core of the brand promise of this business school. So I was neck deep in it. I was like, I was immersed in it like a study abroad student and learning a foreign language or something. And Shirky's statement was almost in passing in this tech talk, but it totally TED Talk. I just combined TED Talk with TikTok there, didn't I? It's funny. TED Talk, but it struck a chord that it isn't the technical capital that matters, it's the social capital. And I knew that social capital was a leadership concept and not much of a marketing one. And ever since he said that, I've never looked at social media the same way since. In fact, I've never looked at marketing the same way since, if I'm honest about it, because marketing is leadership and marketers are leaders. And nothing could be truer than when we're building value in social groups, including those online. It's one of those things where it's not only what we do for our craft, we are influencing people and we are doing it without a lot of power, which is something that any leader worth their salt needs to spend some time understanding, because we all know that the power in a leader and constituent relationship lies with the constituent, right? The minute we get tired of somebody we're following, we can just stop following them. So, as constituents, we have that power. So that's what we're doing day to day, through all of these activities that we do to try to generate change and action among people and groups. But it's also a lot of what we do in our work. Rebranding is a great example of that. I mean, that's some serious change management. And we kind of look at it through a marketing lens instead of a leadership one. And we really ought to be spending more time looking at it as leadership. And I think it's true also for the types of ethical questions and moral decisions that we need to be making as marketers. When you think about something like Facebook, and it's kind of in the midst of some controversies right now, that platform was built by marketers. I mean, who's responsible for Facebook's rise? It's us. We're buying ads, we're recommending clients buy ads, we're telling our brands to buy ads, and we built them up. That's where they generate their revenue. And I think we need to elevate kind of our role in all of this to take some more responsibility. And I think leadership kind of gets us there. Community is more than connections. Back to social media. That's a key concept as well. We're good as marketers. We tend to be good at building audiences and channels, but value is created in networks through social capital. It's the currency that's exchanged in social groups. We'll take a look at that as we go along, but it's not enough to just build a bunch of connections. The value requires leaders and leadership acumen to generate it. And here's the thing, the truth that us marketers really need to come to grips with: there is a huge gulf between driving conversions and building community. It's a big gulf, and it takes an entirely different skill set. And I argue that social media is a social construct that is about building community and building social capital. So we need to stop looking at marketing to teach us how to generate value. Again, that value is social capital. In these social groups, leadership is the discipline that can help us understand how to build social capital. And there's plenty of material to help us. There's my new book, which dissects a whole bunch of material that came before it, but it requires that mindset change, really thinking differently about social capital and how it requires leaders to build it and not marketers to contrive it. Learning these leadership skills is also a far better use of our time than honing tactics across these fleeting tools. I mean, yesterday's TikTok is tomorrow's Clubhouse, is yesterday's MySpace, and so on. Savvy leaders and managers of brands don't chase our tails learning tactics associated with these platforms. It's not the technical capital that matters. We look for the concepts and the disciplines that span these fleeting tactical areas, and we build sustainable skills that transfer to any context. We build social capital skills. That'll serve us a lot better in any kind of context, be they bull markets or stay-at-home orders in the middle of a pandemic. So, as our concern today is all about trying to think differently about social media and looking through that lens and trying to shed a few biases that have been built. I think there's a lot of distractions that are I think keeping us from seeing the truth about social media marketing, and I'll take some of that on here in a minute. But let's, again, approach these online social groups as leaders and not marketers, and see where we can learn about ourselves and maybe be much more effective as just professionals, but I think drive more value for our brands, for our clients, for our companies, for our bosses, and so on. So let's talk about the roots of bias, why marketers, in my opinion, think that social media is such an effective marketing tool when the data, which we'll show later, says that it isn't. Clay Shirky was one of many back in the day who wrote a book about essentially taking marketing concepts and sort of polishing them up and having them fit this new sort of social construct. The Chris Andersons and Guy Kawakowskis and Seth Godins of the world got us really excited as marketers. We jumped in it full bore and we ate it up. I mean, millions of eyeballs at a cost that fell through the floor, friends selling to friends. It felt like a loophole in the marketing system, and we got really excited about it. My book details a guy from Boston, actually. Maybe some of you have heard of Eric Prue, who started around this time. He got laid off from his ad agency and started a blog and built this online social community that ended up funding a feature-length documentary called Lemonade. And we got so excited about this kind of stuff as marketers. But what we failed to recognize at the time, and I think even now, marketers are unreliable data points when it comes to marketing in general, but certainly to social media. Non-marketers don't view social media like we do. They see it and interact with it completely differently. They look at TikTok videos and they have a completely different experience than we do. They're not thinking about the creativity necessarily and the production value and the storytelling or whatever. They don't see, social media as channels of influence, or for influence. They engage in social constructs like social media as an opportunity for reciprocity and connection. That's very different than the way marketers look at it. I take a look at a book called Social by Dr. Matthew Lieberman in my book, and it shows how the network in our brain responsible for social engagement is completely different than the network responsible for other activities that we go through day to day, like, for instance, evaluating transactions. In fact, Dr. Lieberman says that it's like a seesaw. When we've engaged that network, that part of our network in our brain to engage in social activity, the rest of it is practically turned off. So this not only prevents us marketers from seeing the social web the way that those participating in it do. We are literally in the wrong headspace when we're experiencing social media, but it's what marketers face when marketing to someone in these constructs. You have to ask them to literally switch networks, something that Dr. Lieberman says isn't very easy at all. And it's something that we do with varying degrees of success. There's a lot more, in his book that I think has a lot of important impacts or connections for social media marketing, not the least of which is that we feel pain of a social disconnection in the same part of our brain that we feel physical pain. That's why we use the word heartache or a gut punch when we've been rebuked, and we protect it in the same way with those same instincts that we do for physical pain. So that same instinct that has you pull your hand away from a hot stove, same thing to protect the social connections that we make in our life. And he makes a special emphasis to say that whether the instance of social rejection matters or not, we have all kinds of alarms. Social connections are responsible for our very survival. We've evolved them for millions of years, and we protect them very, very closely. So we've kind of got that working against us when we think about our biases. And I think that that's allowed us to build what I call a straw madman when it comes to social media marketing data. Once you peel back the biases, it's clear to me that the data supports the idea that social media marketing doesn't work. Now, I know that's a very bold claim. We'll talk more about it. But again, I think it's a straw man built largely by the companies who benefit from the money that we spend with them. And it's amplified by the biases that we have built up. And I looked at about 50 social media marketing studies. We scoured the internet for them and other places and came up with, I think, a very compelling sort of case against this in the book. If you don't feel like buying the book, I've excerpted the entire chapter on my blog, so you can take a look at it there. We don't have time to go through all the studies, of course, but let me highlight a few and see if I can make the case here around social media marketing being an ineffective marketing tool. The first question we have to ask ourselves is, who's running the henhouse here? When we are looking at social media effectiveness, what data are we using, and whose data and where is it coming from? An altimeter and Hootsuite study found that only 26%, it's a pretty paltry number, of marketers tie social media success to business results. So leads and sales and form submits and those things that matter to business. These companies like to gaslight us to say that they're giving us top of the funnel numbers when they say engagement and views, and that's just not true. That those are not things that businesses need to drive either awareness or purchasing decision and so on. So we're not looking to business results. We're relying on the tools. 74% of us are relying on the tools themselves. So we're asking Hootsuite and Facebook and HubSpot, to the very people that we're giving money to help us with social media marketing, to tell us whether it's effective or not. And I think that's a real issue with the integrity of the data for sure, but also with the decisions that we're making around social media. The other thing we seem to be doing is sort of throwing our arms up when it comes to measuring any kind of ROI with social media. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. Here's a couple of studies to illustrate what I'm talking about. An AMA, actually, a Duke survey of CMOs said that CMOs rank their return on social media a 3 out of 7, and they have for over 4 years. Like, what a boring malaise. Like, what else are you investing in your life that you would rank 3 out of 7 for 4 years before you'd make a pretty serious change? And they plan to still increase their spending on it. Total disconnect in my mind of social media effectiveness and ROI. HubSpot released a study that found that 35% say that understanding social media ROIs is important or very important. So the two boxes, important or very important, only 35% of us even care to understand it. 93% use what I call these non-business results to evaluate effectiveness. So, impressions and likes and so on. And the majority of brands, once again, despite these sort of poor performance numbers, are increasing their spending in it while they're seeing declines in engagement. Just this, again, real disconnect around ROI and social media marketing. When it comes to effectiveness, this guy's name is Augie Ray. Great follow on social media. He's a UX expert these days, but he used to be really neck deep into social media, and he was kind of the first social media marketing skeptic that I really got excited about online. He wrote a blog post back in 2014 that looked across all of the things that we as marketers are responsible for and gathered all these studies. And we bit back and confirmed his blog post of 2014 that social media is not an effective channel to do anything that we're really responsible for as marketers, whether it's generating awareness or generating leads, driving purchase intent, or even reaching new segments cost effectively. It is not an effective channel for any of that. The data is pretty clear in my mind, especially when you're looking at studies that don't come from social media companies benefiting from the money that's given to us. Let me give you just a couple of highlights of this. But again, I think if you want to dive in more, check out my blog post. I'm just going to kind of go through this, and then I'll take a quick break and look at the chat, if that's all right, from Chris and from Kamran. So let's go through just a couple of highlights I just wanted to show you. So here's a Journal of Marketing research study that found, as compared to social media, traditional advertising drives more something. And I'm going to give away a free ebook here for anyone that might get this right. So when you think about what social media is supposed to do for you, traditionally, what are we taught that social media does for our brands? And what social media, right? And what traditional advertising is supposed to do for our brands? What are those things? What do you think that social media should be doing for your sales? And what should traditional advertising be doing for your sales? This Journal of Marketing research found that traditional advertising drives more something than social media. What do you think that would be? On effectiveness, talking about paid ads. No, we're talking about organic social media. Parna. Traditional drives more awareness and social helps with mid or lower funnel customers. Okay, good guess. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Parna, let me come back to the advertising and paid social if we have time, because it's more kind of nuanced than I just said. Jill says sales. Chris says more leads. Jamie says sales. So this study from the Journal of Marketing Research said that traditional advertising drives more recommendations, than social media does. I think it's completely backwards from what we think social media ought to be doing for us. Social media for us, I think for most people are saying, it's the recommendations from friends. It's going to get us more activity. It's that peer-to-peer sort of marketing that the great promise of the social web, and traditional media actually does more of it. So anyone that answered that question, send me an email and I'll shoot you an ebook of Leading in a Social World. Thanks for participating. I appreciate that. Here's another study. This is a Journal of Marketing research study that found the mere acting of liking a brand has no positive first order effect on really anything, consumer attitudes or purchases online. And in anything, it's detrimental. So liking creates, a like isn't necessarily anything that's very positive, and it certainly doesn't change any kind of behavior, which is remarkable because it sort of subverts what we know to be true about influence. If anyone is familiar with Robert Cialdini's work around influence and the idea of consistency. It's a remarkable finding, I think. A University of Maryland and Duke study. This is one of my, I think, favorites that I talk about quite a bit. They looked at 170 million users of 3,000 brands on social media and found that word of mouth is often subject to negative bias, and it affects brand performance negatively. It tends to damage it when it affects it at all. And get this, the larger the following, the more likely it is to be negative. The smaller, the more positive. So think about that when you think about, or when you're asked to report your growth of your fans and your followers to your boss, or when you're sending that up to your client as a metric of positive social media growth. David wants to talk about the distinction between organic and social, or is organic social media marketing an oxymoron? It's a good question. I don't know, David. I think that when we think about organic social media and paid, you're right, these are sort of easy labels that we're putting on the two of them. Advertising, why don't we just take a minute, since we've got a couple of questions about this now. Advertising, and if you've created a network online and you're advertising and showing business results through that network and through the platforms that are doing it for you, that's great. This book and the idea of building social communities online isn't just limited to Facebook and Twitter, although those are two places where you can certainly build social capital and build social constructs. But there's a lot of different ways that the web itself is social, and that we come together as social groups online. In fact, we're social beings, and the web itself is generally you could consider it just a kind of a social drive of ours to connect with people. So I think that those, yes, I am painting with fairly broad brushes, but if you think of the social web as a place to come together and connect and find each other for exchanges of reciprocity, that's what we're talking about. This isn't sort of an advertising idea or an advertising book. If you, again, those are like building audiences, advertising to them, totally different discipline. I'm also not talking about social capital in the way that we think of like NFTs or a blue check mark next to Twitter, or somebody who's built a reputation on YouTube that can generate them revenue. That is something around social media that kind of creates confusion of what we're talking about. So we're talking about marketing to social groups that have come together for reciprocity. I guess that's where I'm at. David, do you want to unmute and talk a little bit more about that?
No, I think I kind of agree with you. When I, back, 10 years ago, when everybody started to talk about social media, maybe it was a little longer, I always thought it was a contradiction. How could social networks, communities be media? It seemed like a contradiction, an inconsistency.
Right.
Yet that's not the direction things went in.
I think it's a great point. They used to call it social networking, actually, a long time ago. So social media being like one aspect, I think, of the social web. And yeah, I'm with you. I think it is a little oxymoronic. Although, sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say there is one, and I'm going to shut myself off because they're here to see you. The only thing I'd say is that if you, I was always struck. I read Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he does mention that just seeing your name has a positive impact in people's trust in your brand. So there is, I don't know the cost of that, but there is some benefit. If everybody's on social platforms and they see your name, there is some, just in seeing your name, there is some plus.
Yeah, that's a great book and an interesting connection. I think that the studies that we found showed that brand affinity isn't a result of social media, but rather we follow the brands we're already aware of. And it becomes really difficult at that point if that's true. And again, the studies are on the blog post, and I'd totally welcome a dialogue about it if you disagree with it. But if that's true, then everything else we know to be true, or we think that we're measuring around sales and awareness and purchase intent and funnel conversions that we're measuring through social media or the social web becomes a little suspect. Like if that the name that you're seeing, has a positive effect on me because I'm already aware of it, or is it sort of brand new? That's another kind of nuance that occurred to me as I was listening to you. Anyone else want to jump on this? Thank you, David. That's really good stuff. I appreciate your engagement. Yes, I do feel that people confuse social media marketing with community building via social channels. That's, I think, a lot of what we're talking about. That's kind of the fundamental sort of underpinning of much of this. And we'll talk more about social capital, which is what I kind of think about the value that's built in communities, and instead of just kind of building groups of connections. Awesome stuff. Thank you for engaging. I love it. It's hard to read the Zoom, as they say. So thank you so much for chiming in. Keep them coming for sure. So all of this drove Avinash Kaushik. If you guys follow this person online, you know what a thought leader, well-respected thought leader this guy is in the world of analytics and other things. He wrote a great blog post that we found as part of this research, and said, I appeal to the rational assessors in all of us to kill all the organic social media activity by your company, all of it, because of the negative biases, because of the wasted resources. He's convinced, as we are, that it is really a triumph of hope. And I think, again, kind of aided by our biases around what social media is and can be. And so social media marketing, kill it, is what he says. Pretty bold claim. So I thought now would be a time when we could go into the breakout rooms, Chris. So I've got some questions that I thought we could kind of tease out, and we did a little bit of this, I guess, together. I don't know how big the room is, but we could conceivably just do it here. I mean, it looks like there's not so many people that we could do a breakout room, but I've got some questions we could go through. Chris, what do you think we should do? You want to do the breakout rooms?
I think we could do it right here in this session. I think that makes sense, actually. Aaron, you can go right ahead.
Okay, cool. I was thinking the questions that we might want to start with when we start thinking about how and changing kind of directions or changing our minds around what social media and the social web can do from a marketing perspective. These are some questions that I tend to ask when I'm consulting on this topic. This is where we start. So how do I feel when a social gathering is interrupted by a marketer? And you can think of maybe a canvasser that's ringing the doorbell at game night. Maybe you're walking with a group of friends through a music festival and somebody comes and shoves a flyer in your face, that type of thing. And is that consistent with the way that I view and look at social media and the social web and how I want to intercede in those social groups to generate some influence? Another, I think, compelling question is, what is my company using to measure social media marketing's effectiveness? So am I using what the tools are telling me are important, or am I actually finding ways to use analytics and those types of tools to say, here's a channel that's driving business results for my brand? Or if it's awareness, if it's something like David mentioned, that presenting a brand is important in and of itself, like where and how do you measure that kind of value? And are you seeing the results from it? And another question would be, what are the similarities or differences of online social group constructs and in-person social constructs? Because I think this is a legitimate thing to think about. Do online social constructs behave in the same way? And do they generate value in the same way? We'll talk about social constructs and social media, social capital more specifically in terms of the science behind it in a minute. But those are some of the questions I thought we could talk about in a little bit of a breakout here. Who would like to jump in?
So I will say something.
Great.
I think these are excellent questions, by the way, Aaron. I will share my experience. I will keep to myself where it was, but if you go into my profile, you can probably find it. I didn't feel that strongly about social media. I was head of marketing, CMO, whatever you want to call it, SVP, at a medium-sized financial services company. And I saw a certain role for it, but I didn't believe strongly in its impact on results. Mm-hmm. But I kept being asked in meetings with my CEO why I wasn't more aggressive on social media platforms. I would respond by saying I don't really see it as an effective tool to develop, to develop the brand awareness and the direct response results that I thought the company wanted. I would say that for consecutive meetings until rumors started going around that my job was in jeopardy because I wasn't exploiting social media channels the way I needed to be. And I started to I was forced to do stupid things. I eventually left the company and became a career and leadership coach, in part because of it. Mm. So that's a very cynical view of things, but that's an honest experience.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. I would have loved to have found you. Maybe you can be in the next edition of my book. It's a terrific story, and I'd love to dive into it more. It's interesting how, what's that?
And true.
Yeah, no, yeah, I believe you. But I think, I've got clients. We turn down almost all social media work that comes to my agency now. I just don't believe I can add value to it. So I turn it down. And there's a few exceptions where I feel like we can turn some dials, but for the most part, it's not a tool that I feel, okay with taking money for. And your story is interesting because I think, a lot of companies see their competition on social media and doing things through the social web that gets them excited and they feel like they ought to be there. And I don't know if that was the pressure behind some of the things you were experiencing, David, but that happens a lot. And you just can't get, if somebody is measuring value that way, it's a challenge to get them off of that. And it's yet another reason why I think marketers need to spend their time learning about the discipline of leadership, because at that point, your job is not a marketer, it's a leader. You have to lead people towards some pretty serious change.
I think it's very difficult to change a conventional wisdom, to use the Galbraithian term. I think it's very, I mean, eventually it will break. Clearly it hasn't yet.
Thank you, David. That's great stuff. And I'm looking at your direct message. Can I share that, David? I don't know if you're on mute. Sure thing. Yeah. So yes, I was defining a sales or kind of a promotional activity that interrupts a social construct, which is different than some sort of, you know, marketing message or promoting, as you put, the good works of others, and kind of you know, you can think of how you market in these social constructs differently than you might with a sales promo. It's sort of a thought experiment, and I know that there's a difference between the two. But when it comes to that triggering of the neuroscience, I think it's the same idea, very much so. And in fact, if you find later that you've been bait and switched, so you've been sort of softly promoted to by a company, it damages value even more so than if you were honest about it up front. Now, I don't mean to suggest that it's not honest when you, you know, promote things differently, but it can be perceived that way, and it's a very real risk in these social constructs. Bait and switching really kills social capital. So just another thing to throw out there. Anyone else have some thoughts about how you're measuring social media? Does anyone have, you know, an example, you know, because there are people out there that are doing social media and measuring it to business results. There are those, you know, outliers and those people that are doing well. Anyone measuring social media in a good way or in a way that ties to business results?
I guess I'll try to chime in a little bit on this matter. I mean, the way I kind of see it when it comes to company social media usage, it really just depends on your target audience and the target audience persona, in that sense of like how high usage that is your target audience on social media in that sense too, right? So for example, I guess like as an example, if your target audience persona is the millennial generation per se, then okay, it can make sense to place some emphasis on that part, right? But to now give the example of this front, it's more so I'm on a leadership board for this local young professional networking group I'm a part of, and we mostly use Facebook and Instagram for relaying the message that we need to relay to our members and our followers as well. And I think the way I personally would look at it, it would be just more so just the overall engagement of it in terms of how the impressions, how many people engaged with the posting, or if they did any action when it came to the posting. Like for example, we're promoting an event, we say link in the bio, how many people actually clicked on the link in the bio to sign up for the event, and so forth. So it's just more so, and at the same time, how many people we end up getting to follow the page as well on that sense too. So it's just more so because where we are right now, the thing was that we took last year off essentially, so we're kind of rebuilding our group again per se. So it's kind of like on that growth stage, and that's what we're just trying to see how to be able to how many followers can we gain, and then the amount of reach as well as the amount of engagement at the end of it. That's the main KPI for me as to our postings and so forth. Now, mind you, this is all just organic social efforts that we're doing right now.
Sure. Right. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. I think those are the types of measurements that by and large, we have as marketers been kind of conditioned to believe are related somehow to business value. And again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that those aren't valuable to your business. And if they are, great, keep doing it. But Avinash Kaushik actually in that blog post has this really fascinating, basically a formula to really evaluate if there is any kind of value in those types of activities. And I think he will strongly suggest that the negative bias and the complaints that you're opening yourself up to, and really the very small numbers of things like shares and engagement and what that even drives for you, by and large, isn't worth what companies are spending on them. But again, I hate debates, and I'm not like the guy that wants to be, the smartest in the room or whatever about this. If it's driving business value for you, keep doing it. But if it's not, I think, the data that's in my blog post in the book could help you sort of make a case for rethinking how are we approaching social, and are we spending an appropriate amount on it given the return we're seeing?
Right. Well, I guess the way I would see it, because I do agree with you in terms of like the business perspective. I just saying like in this particular example, is just since it's purely organic, the way I kind of look at it from a organic social perspective, I see it's more so of the amount of engagement that we get on the postings and so forth. But if we do any paid social efforts, that's when, you got to look at what leads generated, the amount of conversions that we get from those advertisements and so forth. So I guess like if from a for-profit company per se, it's, you got to look at it from that perspective of how many conversions, how many leads we receive from those efforts.
Great. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that. Well, we've got it's 10 till already. Wow. I'm like halfway through the presentation. So, or the material that I thought we could talk about. But these questions are terrific. So I think maybe, Chris, why don't I just kind of go a little bit more? I'll kind of breeze through some of the key concepts that, that I wanted to touch on, and we can see if there's more questions, maybe if I can spend 5 more minutes kind of going through some material. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep going, Aaron. And if we have to cut it short, and if people have questions they can't get to, we can always send them your email and they can follow up with you that way also. So keep going with it. Anytime.
Email me anytime. Okay, so this idea of social constructs and how they operate, how they work, what the scientists tell us about this is fascinating, and I think is not as often applied by social media marketers to online social constructs as it should be. And again, this concept that we are leaders really, especially in this kind of a space, helps us see these social constructs and what generates value in them a lot more clearly than marketing does for a lot of different reasons. Real quick, here's a woman named Nicole Kelly that I found in my research. She has a terrific story, gave me some wonderful content for the book. She found herself in kind of a quasi-marketing role with a debt relief organization and built a 1 million-person social media community across Facebook and Twitter and a couple of user groups, and they shared best practices and they helped people get out of debt, and they were talking about financial best practices, personal finances, and so on. And she started measuring the results of the folks who touched that social community and what that meant to the organization through their forms mostly, and first payment, which is a huge, I guess, metric in her world, and found just tremendously more likely to participate in kind of the transactional side of the business. And she talks about her work as building community. She just really eschewed the word marketing altogether. She started hiring non-marketers actually because she got tired of training them to unlearn marketing, which I thought was pretty telling. And she gave me this great line of the type of work that she does is about opportunities for connection, not opportunities for conversion. And I've stolen this in several places in my business, and I keep telling her that I am, and she's gracious about it. But I just love, if there's anything that kind of crystallizes the difference between leading people in social groups and thinking about them as leads or audiences or marketing segments, I think that's it. She really just calls it a flip on marketing, what she does. So it requires a completely sort of wholesale change in the way that you think about what you do. There's all kinds of different capital that's measured and managed in organizations, physical, human, intellectual, and social capital is something in organizations that is measured and managed. I've got way too many concepts to kind of talk about in the next 3 minutes or whatever. But it is social capital is something that organizations will intentionally build and cash in on, and there's plenty of of literature and thought leadership around social capital as it relates to that. It's a little tricky to get through because it's something that's hardwired in us, sort of the water we're swimming in. It also becomes a little sort of Ouroboros-like, where the thing that is required to build it is also its outcome, like trust is one of those things. You need trust to build it, but it's also how you measure its outcome. So it gets a little messy to kind of define. And like human beings and relationships, it's a little messy. It's used also in other places, communities and families and countries and societies. But again, it is used in business. It's much better, I think, to explore the meaning than to define it, because it's almost as much of an art as it is a science. But here's one, if it helps: a resource of relational wealth. So what I get out of social capital is very different from what David gets out of social capital. And it also, you can generate it for individual or collective working professionals, so groups, brands, or people individually. You all are, seeing something very different out of your investment in AMA Boston than a brand than Care One did for Nicole Kelly. And it's created by investing and managing the configuration and operation of networks. There's a very important structural element to building social capital that we don't spend a lot of time as marketers thinking about. And they're durable social relationships. So again, the relationships themselves and how durable they are and the value that's being exchanged between them, as opposed to just creating a network or a group of people or an audience for either advertising or whatever. I'm going to blow through. Actually, let's just talk that, there's all kinds of value that social capital creates in organizations, including what I think is kind of the myopic focus of marketing and sales using it, which is to access privileged information and access other networks. But there's all kinds of other, everything from innovation to intra and entrepreneurship to supply chain management, believe it or not, and talent flow and customer churn and a lot of things like that social capital is used in organizations. We talked a little bit about what kills it, this idea of bait and switching, but also balance sheet management. It's not social constructs and people that are coming together to exchange value in social groups are not a quid pro quo kind of relationship. That's a leads group, right? Social groups do something completely different. And I think as marketers, we like to conjure these ratios of value, like 60% of value added content on social media gives you the right to, promote 40% of the time. And it's just not the way it works. It's all about persistent reciprocity. Requires a flattening, a democratization of the group. There's no sort of hierarchy between brand and customer or, leader and follower. It really is social groups require, and the social capital requires democratization in that. A lot of human connection, asking questions, finding out needs of the group, and connecting to the norms of the group in a human way. And again, consistency, not saying one thing, doing another, and kind of flipping. I think this is a lot of where the friction of marketing in social groups kind of comes to bear. We have a brand and a customer. We aren't consistent. We say we're going to add value and then we don't. And it's built with 3 bonds. The research is pretty clear on this. I come to call them 3 bonds. Leaders who have built cultures that are rich in social capital focus on the structure. They intercede differently in the way that structures or the network is structured. They focus on the relationship. This is the leadership part of all this, the relational bonds. And then cognitive bonds, marketers are really good at. We know how to build what's called a conceptual apparatus. Like, you need to know what it is you're signing up for the AMA Boston, because you don't know what you're going to get out of it. You're sort of giving up quite a bit of your discretionary time and sort of you don't know what you're signing up for, and there's no time horizon of when or if you're even going to get something back. So you need that conceptual apparatus. Leaders do this. Marketers know how to do it. We make icons and logos and signage and commercials with 1990s hip hop artists serving ice cream to give us that conceptual apparatus. So we actually have that part down. I talk about social media and customer care in the book as a nice foil. There's a lot of value that's generated through social media customer care in organizations. We look at several different case studies. I talk with Zappos and their customer loyalty team, and we kind of come up with 14 rules for building social media-based customer care. It's just, like I said, a nice foil. And this chapter is on my blog as well, if you'd like to check it out. But it shows you the difference between how a customer care approach treat social constructs versus a marketing one. So I encourage you to check that out. The next part is all about the leadership skills for building social capital. Again, if we're leading as marketers, if you think about leading your social groups, that's what will generate the social capital for you, as opposed to thinking of it in terms of conversions. That switch of thinking from making connections as opposed to making conversions. I think that's where you start to build serious value. And I regret not having a lot of time to go through all of this. But let's just say there's 4 books that I kind of deconstruct in my book, and I recommend them. In these books are some really good gems on building social capital, and I pull those out and talk about them. They're all research-based, except I guess Greenleaf's Servant Leader, which is, that's who invented, by the way, servant leadership. I think contrary to popular belief, it is not Simon Sinek. And Greenleaf, his book is terrific. It's like reading Walt Whitman more than anything. But the other 3 are very much research-based, including Brene Brown's amazing Dare to Lead book, one of the better marketing books I've read in a long time. So the fundamentals that you can then kind of cull after all of this, through all this research, and some other kind of papers actually also on leaders that build social capital, and the kinds of things that you can then just import over to your social groups online, is credibility. Starts with credibility, and this means authentic and true. So coming to whatever or leadership environment that you're engaged in with a true sense of who you are and what your style is, and being honest and truthful, and building that credibility. And it's true for brands as well. So show some cracks in your brand and connect your credibility with these social groups, and then walking the talk. So if there's any kind of common thread among all of the leadership, it's this: we tend to follow people who say what they do and do what they say. And we identify needs of the people in the social groups, and find those common threads. This requires a lot of questions and listening, which we talk quite a bit about in the book. And then you develop relationships. Leadership is a social activity. And so building relationships based on those needs, not based on your needs, that then drives group action. The last thing that social capital savvy leaders do is inspire a shared vision. And this comes straight out of Kouzes and Posner's book, which I just love, because one way to illustrate what this is all about is if you flip it, it's not you share an inspired vision, you're inspiring a shared vision. So it requires you to listen to the social group and your constituents and their needs, and then build a vision that's around that. And that's also good brand strategy. My firm does a lot of brand strategy, and this is basically what we do. We find the common threads of the stakeholders that we're involved with, and we come up with strategies and tactics that will inspire that within them. So those are kind of the fundamentals. There's an Academy of Management paper, that research paper, again, about leaders who built cultures rich in social capital. They come up with 3 basic approaches. It's a lot about coaching and listening and seeing yourself as a position, no different from anyone else in the group, just a position of responsibility to a very diverse set of stakeholders. There's this old school, wonderful case study that I think still resonates and is strong about cargo pants and Ann Taylor, and how this, to a lot of people, this unrealistically thin model didn't represent their brand promise of, being for all kinds of working women. And they got a lot of criticism for it. It became this big sort of scandal. And they responded by listening. They said, "We hear you. This is a very real problem. We think you're right." They flattened the relationship and democratized it. And they gave a solution that said, "We will order the pants in all the sizes of the working women in the office and post those on Facebook." And that then created that, again, democratization and equality among the needs, a lot of reciprocity. It's just a really great example of actually thinking like a leader in these groups and not like a marketer. Then we build 8 essential practices. All of this distillation comes down to these kinds of practices, which, this is the way that we have to learn things these days in easy digestible lists. So my first one is to embrace the complexity and acknowledge the sophistication. So I kind of right away deconstruct the idea that you need 8 of them. Human relationships are difficult. Leadership is difficult. David can share that as much as anyone in the group tonight. But and if anyone's ever worked on themselves and trying to develop these so-called soft skills, that they are the hardest things that you can work on. It's hard, it's tough, and it's sophisticated. So as marketers, we kind of get used to those little tactics that we like to mark off a list. You have to treat your segments as people. You have to treat your groups as people, not segments. And people are made of emotions, and recognize that these aren't audiences, they aren't segments. They're there to connect and build reciprocity. You have to get yourself and the brand together first. That's that strategy stuff that we just talked about. Who am I as a leader? Who am I as a brand? How can I be true and authentic? How can I connect with and inspire that shared vision among my constituents? And then you build that credibility after that. Be ready and okay for uncertainty. The Nicole Kellys of the world and the people that I've met that do this really well, they're more like jazz musicians than they are like any kind of working professionals. They understand that, you know, social groups, the science is pretty clear on this. Social groups have agency. They change. They change their norms. They change their purpose. They change what they're coming together for. They're more like a murmuration of birds than they are any kind of traditional kind of market segment that I think we're used to thinking of. So you got to be okay with that and get ready to flex and improvise. Takes a long time to do this work too, so get ready for that. You know, and manage your clients and the folks around you, that this is not a punctual investment. And again, that idea of asking questions, I don't think we do nearly enough of that in social media. And people build, and people use is a Greenleaf concept, which I think is just really wonderful. I think that's the difference. When you move somebody through a funnel, or that's what you're looking to do with them, whether it's the bottom of the funnel or the top of the funnel or somewhere in between, you are people using. People building is what social groups demand and what drives social capital. And so I think that requires a big mind shift. Here's where I kind of wax on about how we are recognizing the humanity in all of this when we lead in this way. A thought leader that had a big influence on me is named James O'Toole. And he wrote in his, he was studying values-based leadership, and he basically said, once you find something that's both effective and moral, what choice do you really have? And I really feel that way about building the skills for social capital, whether you're leading a team in person or whether you're leading a group of folks that have come around a brand promise online. It's both effective and moral. And I think through that lens, you start to see that there's really not much of a choice. I'm over. Thank you for the great questions. Would just be thrilled for this group, especially had some really terrific thoughts on this, to email me thoughts, connect with me on Twitter, check out the book, and give me some feedback and some reviews. I'd love to hear it.